What is up? D2 from D2AOV.com here. Long time no video from me, and that is because I was agonizing over this tier list. It's super duper late, I realize that, and it's so late in fact that because there's a new patch coming up pretty soon, I don't know when, but it's coming up pretty soon since it's already out on Taiwan. I'm making this basically a temporary one, but I had to get something out at the very least. I couldn't make anyone wait any longer. If you look at it, it's basically just kind of a bare bones, no explanations or anything. That's what this video is for, but again, I had to get it out. Now, this tier list was, like I mentioned, driving me absolutely crazy, and I gotta be completely honest, I was getting nothing done because as I agonized over it, I would go into the Taiwan server and just play Abyssal Clash over and over again, because you can't really play Abyssal Clash in other servers because there's the queue time is way too long. So yeah, that's basically what I've been doing. I've been just relapsing into playing Abyssal Clash this entire time and wasting a lot of time because I have been so fixated on this. But it is finally out. As you can see, this is just a draft. It's not even published quite yet. I'll try to get these published at the exact same time, this video and this article, because unlike my other tier list, the video is pretty much necessary since I have no explanations on the actual tier list here. Anyway, let's get on to it. I'll try to make this as quick as possible so people aren't watching this for, many hours. But just starting off, this basically explanation, like just what I mentioned, just driving me crazy. Different metas and different servers. Pros think completely differently of different heroes. Like, for instance, Sephra permaban in the AOG, which is the Vietnamese league, but completely just treated like normal in the GCS or RPL, just things all over the place like that. So it's hard to get a sense of what's happening. So in the end, basically what I ended up doing is there are certain heroes for whom I have a very strong opinion, and I just placed them wherever the heck I wanted. And it's a very good chance that they don't align with your views or, a lot of the views of the players. Basically, I'm saying, I have a strong opinion on this hero. This is how strong I think they are. I don't care what everyone else thinks. I don't care what's popular or how people think of that person. I'm placing them here because I said so. And then there's the exact opposite end of the spectrum where I have no idea about certain heroes. And, just completely conflicting. I don't know, because it seems like they're being picked a lot in one league and not a lot in another league. And on ladder, they seem strong sometimes, so it can complete garbage other times. And so I just do my best to be like, well, this is what the prevailing theory seems like right now, since I have really no clue. So, like I mentioned, like the title will say, it's probably on my worst tier list. There's going to be lots of disagreements, but let me know in the comments what you think. The good news is this tier list is not going to last very long because, like I mentioned, the next patch is going to come out. Only 10 heroes have been affected, but when I did the review of this particular patch, I had none of the heroes get a 1 or 0 in my rating of how much they're going to change. So all these are big changes, and that might switch up the meta quite a bit. I'll also talk about these heroes and what's going to happen to them once the new patch hits. So pay attention to that as well, so that you're ahead of the curve when the next patch comes out. Hopefully when the next patch comes out, I'll have the proper tier list with proper explanations and everything in a month or less after it comes out. So like I mentioned, this tier list took me forever to do, but if I sat down and wrote all the blurbs and did everything properly, like formatted it properly and everything, it would take at least another week, maybe even longer. At that point, maybe it's already too late. Maybe you have to already start going for the tier list for the next batch. So anyway, like I mentioned here, watch the video, make sure you listen to the explanations, but let's talk about the overarching kind of themes of this particular tier list, or sorry, the placements I should say. The biggest ones are which heroes can best make use of Devil's Awakening and or Sacred Protection. I should say or, not and or. Now, obviously Sacred Protection is going to receive a nerf, and the nerf is pretty big. They're only removing the movement speed. They fixed the bug with a magic lifesteal, and they increase the magic lifesteal, but it's only 1.5 seconds unless you get a kill or assist in that small amount of time. I haven't been able to test it because the wording is a little bit vague, but I'm somewhat sure that's how it works. But Devil's Awakening, there are a few heroes for whom Devil's Awakening completely changes how they're played. Like, for instance, Crixie rose like a ridiculous amount just from the fact of Devil's Awakening. Quite a few heroes are the same as well. So, heroes that can use that received a massive boost. So that's probably the biggest thing, other than just the meta changing around them. The other thing is a lot of rock paper scissors, and because there's more countering these days, instead of having a lot of heroes in tier S like it did before, like previously there was like 25, 26 heroes in tier S. Nowadays, excuse me. Nowadays, there's or I should go back. By the way, I'm not editing this. I'm just going one go, no edit. So for previously in tier S, how I defined the tiers were tier SS is like they cannot be countered, and then tier S would be like they're good in like basically every single situation. And then once you get to tier 1, it's like they're good in 80% of the situations, but mostly you're picking them in the right situation in which they're good, right? And that means like maybe they're countering something else, maybe the opposing team has no counter for them, like they haven't been picked, and you pick them like as a last resort. Something like Superman, for instance, is good in a lot of situations, but can suffer if you counter pick him. So like as last pick, Superman would be like really, really good. But now with the recent enchantment coming out, there are lots of and things like Diaochan, for instance. Diaochan has thrown a wrench into like everything. Like, and I'll talk about that later. But like Kilgroth countering Diaochan, and then you counter Kilgroth with just a massive burst damage hero. And yeah, there's just rock paper scissors all over the place, which means that because there's less heroes who are good in every single game, I dropped a lot of heroes out of tier 1, or excuse me, out of tier S into lower tiers. I basically shifted like half of the tiers down, or I shifted everyone down like half a tier. Or sorry, the first one was correct. I shifted half of the heroes down like a tier. So you'll see a lot of heroes who used to be in tier 2, now in tier 3. Heroes that used to be in tier 1, now in tier 2, stuff like that. So if it looks like I've completely downgraded your hero, it's not really the case. It's more that I moved everyone down, and the people who survived kind of moved up in a way, right? Like if someone was tier 1 before, and now they're tier 1 still, that means they've essentially moved up. And good thing for you guys, I keep a ranking, so you can just look at the actual ranking and how much they've moved. Not regarding the, not in relation to the actual tier, but in relation to the actual ranking. Excuse me. Well, I forgot how to drink water. Anyway, like I said, no edits. We move on. So, like I just mentioned, there's a lot of parity. And the heroes that used to be in tier 2 are now in tier 3. Some of the heroes from tier 3 moved to tier 4. That means that they're a lot closer together than you might think. And instead of thinking, like A, B, C, D, E, or sorry, A, B, C, D, F, and like there's a huge gulf between them, think of it as, SS is A+, S is A, tier 1 is A-, tier 2 is B+, tier 3 is B. So like even down in tier 3, you're still getting like pretty decent heroes that you can win with. And what else was I gonna say? Oh yeah, well there's like 3 out of 5 heroes in the previous tier 4. They rocketed up, like Diaochan, Preda, Omega actually rocketed up too. So that's a huge reason why I had to actually drop people, so that they're still tier 4 tiers. I'm not gonna like just get rid of tier 4 just because people moved up. I had to like move other people down essentially. So yeah, everyone's pretty much bunched together, and you're gonna see people, in tier 3 or maybe even tier 4. You're like, oh, that hero's good, but then you have to think to yourself, what heroes would you drop below them? And you look at the other ones, they're like, oh, okay, I guess, right? And like for instance, like Astrid, or I don't know, like you'll see Chogna really low, or you'll see like Gilda really low, and you'll think like, wait, that hero's fine. I can do X and Y and Z, and I can beat X and Y and Z hero, right? It's like, well, but who would you actually move below them? You could literally say about almost every. There's like 2 or 3 heroes maybe that you can't say about them. Oh, they're good in this situation, they're good in that situation. They should be higher, right? Like every single hero in the game, you can say like, oh, they should be higher. If you're talking about the bottom heroes, except for like maybe Vera and Azenka, and even people are like Azenka advocates. Anyway, moving on. I'll try to make this quick. Like I mentioned, basically, I will go over why they moved, if they moved, if they didn't move, or if like I mentioned, if I have not a real good feel for the hero, I'll just say so and we'll move on. All right, so starting with tier SS, Hayate. Oh, and by the way, in the parentheses, I'll have the previous tier in rank. So Hayate, previous list, he was tier SS and 1 as well. He hasn't moved. Fennec was tier 1. and rank 32 overall. So that's what that means. All right, so Hade doesn't move. He got a nerf. He got actually a pretty big nerf to his damage, but he's still number one. He's still ridiculous. My theory is that Hayate he was the best hero in the previous meta, despite that meta not being good for him. Like, that's how ridiculously good he is. So even though he got nerfed, he's still the best hero because this meta is even better for him. Like, being super mobile, being able to do the damage that he does, is just like supremely overpowered in this current meta. And the fact that he was even good the previous meta when in the previous meta it was all about like having burst damage was a lot more important than having like mobility necessarily. Like, mobility was good, but having like just the ability to 100 to 0 someone was a lot more important. And having someone who can just like kind of flit around and just be all over the place in the battlefield, that wasn't really good last meta, and yet he was still number one. So the fact that he got nerfed, that just kind of balances out the fact that he's even better in this current meta. Number 2 is Fennec. This is where I have my victory lap, guys, because I bumped Fennec from tier 4 to tier 1 in the past tier list, and I just had a hunch. I'm like, his new kit is way too good. His new kit's just way too good to be bad. I remember casting a community tournament, and people, even like current pros in the Western Western servers, were like, "Oh, Fennec's trash, Fennec's trash." So who's laughing now? It turns out to be way better than even I thought. He's doing ridiculously well in every single pro league. He's obviously been complained about in like every single server as well. So yeah, Fennec, he is ridiculous right now, and really has nothing to do with any of the enchantments. He just has a ridiculously good kit that's really good in this current meta. Zip, he got a nerf. He also was receiving yet another nerf. Zip is really weird because you can actually just troll your team and make your team lose just by doing weird stuff with Zip. But he is the only hero in the game for which you can completely shield your allies from damage. Like, other heroes, you can shield them, you can heal them, you can stun the opponent, what have you. But Zip is the only person who can completely save a hero who is otherwise 100% going to die, and get them to safety. And that is ridiculously powerful. And also his kit is just, there's so many things that he's capable of doing to affect the battlefield that Zip, it absolutely deserves to be there. Number 4 is Enzo. He's getting a pretty, relatively significant nerf. So he might not keep his place up here. Enzo doesn't actually have the greatest win rate in the professional leagues, but in solo queue, that's a lot different because a lot of the ways to deal with Enzo is you have to play as a team. And in solo queue, it's so easy for an experienced Enzo player to just walk up to you, grab you, flip you over, and you're dead. And that can just be game-changing to be able to consistently do that. Number 5 is Florentino. He received yet another nerf. Actually, he's going to receive another nerf on top of that? No. That was from before. So he received another damage nerf, but it doesn't really matter. His kit's just too good to be in the side lane. No one counters him, right? People talk about Scud countering him, and that's just kind of like a false thing. People, like, I don't think people understand why Scud counters Florentino, quote unquote, right? Because they see Scud in games and they go, "Oh, well, the pros are picking Scud to counter Florentino." It's like, no, they have a specific plan. Like, the way that Scud, quote unquote, counters Florentino is you have a bursty side laner, and then you have a bursty jungler, and then you team up every once in a while and go, "Okay, let's burst him down." Because the only way you can deal with Florentino is you burst him down right away before he can do anything. Otherwise, if you have like a dually type hero, like a Kilgoth, what have you, Florentino will literally just 1v2 them. He will literally just 1v2 you. So he doesn't have any 1v1 counters. If you've played as, Richter or Scud, I've heard this all over the Reddits. I've played like, "Oh, this hero, and I beat Florentino." It's like, if that happened, then the Florentino you played against sucked. Okay, that's just the reality. If it's an equal skill Florentino and equal skill opponent, the Florentino will win in the side lane. And so you need to have someone who rotates over and kind of teams up on him. But he does drop to 5 though, because there are ways to kind of play as a team, and people are starting to realize that you can beat him that way by just bursting him down with a couple of heroes. Varus jumps from number 21 all the way up to 6. She has been she's both benefited from the current meta and because of the fact that she can use Devil's Awakening. I thought that Desperate Duel would be best on her, but it turns out Devil's Awakening is the best. She's extremely good just because like her CC throughout the game is really amazing. And it's just hard to take her down in the late game. She's able to just continuously stay in fights for so long. And there's nothing really that you can do about it. She can just take on multiple heroes at once. And yeah, she's just extremely good now. So she's risen from number 21 to number 6. Let's go to tier S. The one thing that's, one thing that's problematic with Varus, though, is she still does lose to Florentino sideline. So as long as you ban Florentino, then Varus is ridiculously good. Actually, Varus is a better team fighter than Florentino. I think the only reason why I had Florentino higher than Varus actually is because he beats her in her lane, and he's not like bad in team fights either. So you know, if not for the existence of Florentino, Varus might be higher. All right, moving on to tier S. I explained the top heroes. I'm gonna go quicker this time. Darcy's still good. He's just not overpowered. Lindis, she moved a little bit. Oh, the other thing I should have mentioned is that marksmen are good in this meta now. Actually, I might actually add this to the description. So if you read this later, there might be another little section here that I totally forgot about. Nowadays, there's a lot of possibilities in the jungle. Because for a while, it was only marksmen. You can only pick marksmen. Marksmen were the best. It was like Violet, Lindis, and then like if you couldn't pick those two, you'd pick like Slims, and you kind of feel sad about it. And then it went the complete opposite direction, right? Lindis was the only real like jungler left, and then or this is like just before AoE 3.0, right? And then all the assassins were the rage, and really there wasn't a lot of marksman jungling. And now both are viable, so you can pick both marksman, marksman and assassins, and they're both fine. I would say the only thing you shouldn't do is pick like a tanky jungler. Those have fallen out of favor, but still, that said, there's lots of there's lots of choices to choose from, not to be redundant, and that means that Lindis just swoops up back on top again, and she's extremely good now. Kriknak is really good for a weird reason, because he used to be you just overkill people really badly. Now that overkill is super useful because of the Sacred Protection. So everyone has Sacred Protection, and having just not enough damage to kill someone is painful. Right, because they just get away, and then obviously, like, the difference between having a kill and having to run away and not is a huge deal in the course of the game. So Kriknak now being able to overkill is huge because he could just overkill through the shield, which is nice. One other thing I should mention is that some people didn't notice this, but every single hero as of AoV 3.0, they didn't mention this in the patch, because of the new enchantments, they increased every single hero's base stats, base defense stats. Everyone got more HP, everyone got more base armor, everyone got more base magic. So if people seem harder to kill since the patch, that's the reason why. But for Kriknak, not a big deal. So he rises from 14 to 9. Macross still good, nothing really to say here. He's going to get hurt more than I think people might realize in the Taiwan patch, because he, like, every single dash has a higher cooldown. So that's going to be kind of annoying to deal with. Like, in the grand scheme of things, you might think like, oh, 6 seconds to 5 seconds, like not that huge of a deal, but because he's constantly using it, it really could be. Sephiroth, I'm kind of just trusting the AOG pros here. They're constantly banning her. She's extremely good in the support role now. I would say that her main role is support over mage nowadays. And the other thing is that she like babysitting supports aren't really necessary anymore, so just being able to proactively affect the game as a support and just basically do a ton of damage while actually being a decent support for your team is huge. And the other thing I want to say is that she's by far like the highest support. Every other support dropped down a lot because the Afada runes, the green runes, are absolutely garbage. So you'll see that later. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, Liliana I still have pretty high. People might disagree with this. I rose her from 23 to 12. Some people think that Liliana is dead. I am arguing the exact opposite. She is extremely good still. I think that people have just kind of gotten sick of her and stopped playing her, but she has an extremely high win rate for the amount that she's being picked in the top leagues. Like every single league, they're still picking her, and she's still doing well. The fact that you can just pick her and without regard to the state of the draft at all and still do well is extremely impressive. Next, we have Delchan rising all the way from number 81 to 13. I bet there's a lot of people who actually wanted her or want her to be even higher. Both her fans and her haters. Basically, it's like, you know, how frustrating she can be. But I'm sure there's people who want to put her in SS. There's a lot of conflicting information on her in the leagues. She's played a lot more in RPL than the other two major leagues. I just think that there's still a little bit of lag between people learning how to play her and learning how to play against her. Obviously, it's super annoying having to deal with her new passive, but I think that people will get more and more used to it and be able to kind of counter. Obviously, it's the passive is extremely strong, and there's no way to completely counter it, which is why she's going to remain pretty high even if people start learning how to play against her. But I've put all that into account, and I have her at just 13, not any higher than that, because I think that she's not as good as people quite think. Anyway, next is Raz. Raz, I'm just gonna say, like, I just kind of default left him around the level of Liliana, because I always have him in pairs, and he seems to be still reasonable. The top teams in the top pro leagues are still picking him, so I'm gonna go ahead and trust them. There's nothing really in the he wasn't really super helped by the enchantments, but he wasn't really hurt by them either. So giving him pretty high, and being very flexible, being able to be a different type of Liliana. Basically, you can poke and dive at the same time, and be that person who like can combo the entire opposing team. He seems pretty good. Anyway, basically, Raz is one of those heroes where I have like very little opinion on. So I'm like, seems good. Put him here. I dropped pretty far. Just people don't seem to be having a lot of success with her. She can still do crazy stuff, which is why I haven't dropped her too far. And her existence is part of the reason why Richter's not having a great time. But yeah, there's some issues with her, right? Like if you can kind of prevent her from comboing you, then she's in a really big, really problematic spot. Next is Violet. She moves from 45 up to 16. Right when AoV 3.0 came out, I bet people were saying that Violet's like the best, hero in the game now. She's number 1, but people have calmed down from that perspective and realized she's good, but she's not ridiculous. So I would say that this is a reasonable spot to put her right now. Tel'Annas, she drops from 17 to 8. She doesn't have the mobility that other or kind of like random burst damage. Or she does have burst damage, but it takes a while to get that going. And she doesn't have like the tactical fire Violet or the ability of Linda to flitter in and out and just kill people. But being able to just kill someone from a really far distance is still very useful. And even though she's going to get hurt by the lack of mobility and sacred protection going forward, I think she'll still be pretty strong. Also is still fine. The thing is, like, yeah. Also, again, one of those heroes, he's kind of still picked reasonably often in the pro leagues. I don't really have a huge opinion on him. I just kind of feel like this is a good place to put him. Moving on. Brunhilde, I'm pretty biased by watching some of Zane's stream and seeing how effective she can be in the jungle. Being able to play in the jungle and the Abyssal lane, very powerful. She clears relatively fast. Probably the best teacher in the entire game, for obvious reasons, because of her ult. And just basically the fact that she can do ridiculous damage without having to have any prerequisites. Like, for instance, she doesn't have to pop loose cannon like Wisp or pop tactical fire like Violet. She just basically does a ton of damage. And if ever she needs to run away, she can do so by using her kind of dash thingy. Right, so she does damage without really needing, to set it up, per se, which is unusual. Most other heroes have to press a button to do more damage with their autos. All right, so let's move on to Tier 1. This is the start of the situational heroes. As you can see, there's a lot more heroes in Tier 1. Or, sorry, there's a lot of heroes that I've dropped from Tier S into Tier 1. There used to be 26 heroes in Tier S. And now there's only 19, so I dropped quite a few. And some of those heroes, like Delchan, I moved up in it from previous tier list. So that's all to say that Superman, he was the first hero in Tier S last time, the first hero in Tier 1 last time, and he's still the first hero in Tier 1. So basically, Superman's moved up. He's extremely good. He's still still situational, but he's essentially moved up because he's moved past people like, Richter, Omen, etc. Richter having a tough time lately, still obviously really good, so we're not going to drop him too far. But there's just heroes who he has a tough time with. Whether it's Yina, he kind of loses to Yina, he kind of loses to Florentino, he kind of loses to Varus these days. He has trouble with, he doesn't completely dominate the auto attackers like Omen and Kilgroth. So it's not a great time for Richter, but the fact that he's decent in lane and he's pretty ridiculous in team fights, being able to dive the backline and kill multiple people and get all alive is still ridiculous. So he doesn't drop too far. Omen, I've dropped Omen because you can pick him any time. Like, that kind of makes him a tier S hero, but he doesn't really do anything other than be a safe pick, which is why I just have him in tier 1. He's not going to win you the game, and a lot of times you want to pick someone who can outright win you the game. Omen's usually kind of like a hero neutralizer, like he neutralizes Superman or he neutralizes X hero, whereas a lot of times at this, if you're picking like an early hero, you want to be able to counter someone else. So Omen, in that sense, I've dropped him a little bit from his tier S perch, to tier 1. Marja actually rises up quite a bit from 23 to 40. She's just been doing really well, particularly in professional matches. One thing about Marja is when you pick a marksman jungler, she's a very strong pick to put in the sideline because she still provides that damage to where you can. She's kind of like an in-between here, right? Because you still have decent damage from her in the sideline, so you can trade reasonably well, and have the flexibility of having like a hero who can sort of die but also sort of poke. A lot of times it's hard to decide what to do when you have a marksman jungler. Like, what kind of heroes you want to put in the sideline. Like, you have a couple of melee heroes that can be hard to team fight, and Marja provides you that flexibility. So she's moved up, but obviously still tier 1 because she's situational. Kilgroth, really good with Devil's Awakening. It's kind of funny because Desperate Duel seems it would be good on all the auto attackers, but as it turned out, just Devil's Awakening is just better on him because the really high cooldown on his dash. So being able to dash and use your ult, then dash again is extremely powerful, and that moves him up quite a bit. And he's also pretty high because he is one of the counters to Dialga, because Dialga literally just cannot deal with him because you can't freeze him. Quillen moves down from 13 to 25. Just isn't like the hero he used to be. And the fact that you kind of get off to a slow start with Quillen, he doesn't burst people down like a Kriknak or some of the other junglers ahead of him, is a huge deal, right? You can't really rely on getting that fast start with him. Murad, for some similar reasons, moves down. I think as time has moved on, people have learned to deal with Murad more and more. Before, he used to be able to just come in Tempo Turbulence and get out, but people, like even in the lower ranks, have realized what's going on. Zephyrs moves down as well. Like I mentioned, Tinky Jungler is not so great. So for that reason, not doing great in this this meta. Rourke actually was extremely good at the beginning when 3.0 came out, but having to deal with other marksman junglers really hurts him. He likes dealing with the assassin junglers, which makes him very hit or miss. You have to pick him you have to pick him when the opponent has heroes that he can counter, and that makes it difficult. L'Oreal, another hero just like Violet, that at the beginning people just had her extremely high because of Devil's Awakening. Basically what Devil's Awakening does for her is when L'Oreal was like the best mage in the game, right? It was because she was able to get to her late game, and then she was extremely hard to kill because she had just constant cooldown. She'd pop her ultimate, constant cooldown, she can't catch up to her, she's healing off of everyone, she can literally 1v5 the opposing team. And now that starts a whole lot earlier because her cooldowns are extremely lowered because of Devil's Awakening. So basically she has her late game in the early game, minus the damage obviously, and some of the survivability. The problem is you can still kill her if you have enough burst. So she's not quite as high as people thought she was at the beginning of 3.0, but she's still pretty good. Quixie also moves up. It's kind of funny because they were at 77 and 76 respectively, and now they're 29 and 30. They've both moved up quite a bit. Quixie, again, Devil's Awakening. It's a huge deal because so much of her burst comes from her first two abilities. Her CC comes from her second ability, obviously, and the damage comes from her first ability, but that's basically all her damage. Like, Moonfall does a decent amount of damage, but it's not like a General Ult, for instance. So, being able to go 2-1 and then ult and basically immediately 1 again, and then you have a 2 not too long after that, it's like, it's so much more damage than it used to be. It really shores up a lot of her weaknesses, particularly like in the early game when she's lacking that damage. And yeah, it's huge for her. So moving on, Preda kind of similar situation because his ult, because you can lower the cooldown on his ult with that 1 yellow enchantment. It makes it really good because you can just turn him into an ult bot, and that helps quite a bit to be able to constantly treat him as an auto attacker. And it's extremely hard to dive him because you can just poke from really far. You dive him, he pops his ult, which pops his shield. Then all of a sudden you can just fight, right? Most mages, when you dive them, as long as you can avoid like their stun or avoid whatever they have in their the kit to keep them alive, you're going to kill them. Whereas Preda, he's like, nope, I can actually fight you. So that's actually a big deal. He used to be pretty far low just because like he really couldn't do a whole lot. But now that the meta has shifted in a way where he can defend himself, and being able to defend yourself is very important in the current meta, he's risen all the way up to 31. These next few heroes, you can kind of see I've moved them as a pair around. Basically, Ignis, Kali, Flash, Jinnar are all in the same area, and they're all basically the same. They haven't really moved a whole lot. I know people are partial to like Flash, people are partial to Ignis in the current meta, but there's so much conflicting information on them. They're still good. They're still good in situations, but I wouldn't say they're like overpowered, especially compared to the mages above them. They're just good in the right situation. So if you really like them, you say like, but D2, I can do this in this game. It's like, yeah, that's the situation in which they're good. There's also situations in which they're not as good. Among this mix is Tel'Annas, who I dropped. He's still reasonable. Just not as good in the current meta. But yeah, he's still reasonable. So it's not like he died, not like he fell off the face of the earth. It's just that if you look at all the other mages, like how many mages have risen above him, it's pretty ridiculous, right? So that's the reason why you're not seeing a whole lot too lately, but he's still perfectly fine if you want to pick him. I guess I should mention Jinnar. I think a lot of people might not agree with this Jinnar pick right here, but I think that Jinnar might be a little bit overlooked. I'm still keeping him with this group. I could have dropped him below. I could have separated him from Ignis, Flash, and Kali, but I still think he's reasonable. I still think he can do really well, particularly in team fights, and particularly he can just 1v1, right? You can, like, his ult cooldown is pretty low, especially if you have that one, what is that? I'm already forgetting the enchantment names, guys. The one, yellow, the tier 1 yellow one that reduces the cooldown of your ult, that's actually pretty huge for him, because he basically is an ult bot, but it allows him to ult, for instance, your mage counterpart really early in the game, and still have the ult ready for the next team fight. So, that's huge, and you can really just throw him off guard, and you even kill him in some circumstances. Okay, 1 second. So, moving on. We see our first support other than Tephra. Like I mentioned, supports are having a really hard time. Basically, the moral of the story of support is you can kind of pick any support these days. Any support's fine. You're not gonna do poorly with any one support, which means that they're not as impactful as they once were. Like, I would just save support for like the last pick and not pick them first anymore, and that includes pro games. I would not advise professionals to be picking Baldom and Teamy early because their win rates do not support that. And you can basically pick Thane or even like Pura and still have a reasonable win rate. The other thing that's problematic with Baldom and Teamy these days is that protect the backline isn't as viable because most backlines can just protect themselves these days for the reasons I mentioned earlier. So Baldom and Teamy, they just fall because their supports that aren't doing much, and also the enchantments suck for them. Like, the meta and the enchantments really suck for them. It's just not a good time. Annette is actually in the context of supports falling, she's actually risen, right? Like, if you look at it, Teamy went from 17 to 38, right? But Annette went from 26 to 39, so she hasn't fallen as far. So in the context of other sports, she's actually risen. And the reason for that is because her damage is actually pretty useful in fights. In fact, I was thinking of actually putting her a bit higher, but it still can be difficult for her to have like the greatest impact on games. And like I mentioned earlier, she can't really use like Devil's Awakening, for instance. You can't like you can't predict being able to use your first two abilities and then be like, oh, I can just bump them out of the way with my ult. It's like usually the ult is more strategic and more based on the opponent's positioning than anything. Next we have Ormar, who is grouped in this group. He's been doing extremely well as of late. Just having an aggressive support to go in, get stuns, and never die essentially once you pop your ult is huge. And for the same reason, Omega has risen extremely high. Stuns are very important in the current meta, especially because mobility is so important. Being able to lock someone down is huge. Obviously, I've never been a huge fan of Omega because of the huge cast animations on his abilities. But this is, in a sense, this is really a lot of trusting the pros, because every single professional region, they are picking a lot of Omega now. One thing that people don't realize, because Omega's just never picked, Omega can stun towers. So if you're putting a premium on killing towers, Omega can stun towers with his first two abilities. His third ability obviously does not knock back the tower or anything like that, but it still does damage to the towers. So keep that in mind. If you're diving with him, you can stun the towers with your first and second abilities. Xenial, just not doing great as of late. He kind of just stays in the same place as he was before. He's more of a support these days rather than a sideliner, just because he can't really keep up with the sideliners. Like, if you put him in the sideline, he becomes more of an old bot than anything. Although he does get quite a lot of farm that way if he is in the sideline. Okay, moving on. Lubu has dropped a little bit, especially in the context of where he was previously. Previously, he was like next to Kilgroth, and now finally separated them. Not having complete immunity stuns is huge, right? He has lots of resistance. He gets 50% or up to 50% with his ult, but it's not complete resistance, which means he still dies potentially to someone who can stun him. And because the freeze on Diao-chan's freeze is so long, it still can kill him even through his ult, which is very sad because he really needs to be able to auto attack. Scud and Zuka, there are always a pair. I'm always having them together. They both moved up. Just being able to have that burst and be able to, like I mentioned before, combo with another jungler to be able to take out some of the higher supports. They are basically the counters of the very top tier top heroes because of their burst damage. Tara moves down. She really does not do well with any enchantments. Like, yeah, she has like Desperate Duel, but as it turns out, Desperate Duel isn't as good as the other ones, especially Devil's Awakening. So Tara doesn't really do a whole lot for you. Like, if you want to counter like some of the top heroes these days with a side laner, you'd rather go with the burst damage route with Zuka and Scud and not Tara. Tara obviously just being pretty much immortal is useful, but being able to fight a team, she's just a really terrible team fighter. So that's part of the reason why she's dropped. Speaking of drops, Yoma drops way down for multiple reasons. Just not good in this meta, and not good with the enchantments. It's just a double whammy. He's dropped all the way down. Not good in the jungle anymore. Not good, and like he's not great in the sideline anymore. He's still fine. He's obviously in tier 2. He can like burst someone down basically. But the thing is, if once he bursts someone down, he can't really. They're not in danger of dying because of the shield. And they can turn around and kill him because of Devil's Awakening. It's just not great. Obviously, again, he's still tier 2. He's still okay. It's just that he was like really on the rise earlier, and now he's taken a dramatic fall. Roxy's just a counter hero these days. Devil's Awakening obviously not good for her because her ult already reset her other two abilities if it landed. She's kind of just like a counter hero these days. You pick her to counter specific other heroes. She doesn't really like do a whole lot on herself by herself because if she's outranged, especially by the influx of marksman junglers, she has a hard time, etc. etc. That's the other thing with Yoma too, like just massive mobility, and being able to dance around him is something he can't really deal with. Max, still fine. He's just like basically the definition of a counter hero. So yeah, he's good in his role, not good in much else. Irie actually moved up quite a bit. People have been liking her in the jungle. I was considering actually moving her up even higher, but I didn't have the huevos to do so. But she's very nice. Devil's Awakening obviously helps her a lot. You can triple dash in, use Devil's Awakening, and then triple dash out, which is a lot of mobility. She's kind of like a slightly burstier but less mobile version of Necroth. Also very slow in the first wave in the jungle. Like, she would be a really, really good jungler if her first wave or actually her jungle clear at all or any faster. But she's definitely a jungler now. She's like, her ability in jungle far outweighs her ability in the side lane. Zill's fine. Not as good as he used to be. Obviously dropped 20 spots here. Not the shield really hurts him because being able to take out heroes, he needs to be able to take out heroes, right? Otherwise he's pretty useless. And I guess you can say the same thing for most assassins, but he was always on the razor's edge, you know, having just enough damage to take someone out, or just not enough, depending on the state of the game. And nowadays that errs more on, or that leans more toward not having enough damage because of the fact that he of the shields and whatnot. Lumia, Alistair, and Natalia basically unmoved. They're the quintessential situational mages. People in the RPL love picking, you know, Illumia, Alistair. I don't know why. they think that they're universally good, and I don't agree. Natalia, by the way, will get a buff that might be even bigger than I've written here. Like, I gave her a 2 because, which is like a reasonable buff, but not like huge. They added 100 units or 1 meter to both her first and second ability, and I think her first ability moves faster. Having played against it again in the the Taiwan Abyssal Clash, obviously that's not a normal game, but I think that even if it's only a tiny bit, she may have, like, it may just have, you know, the straw that broke the camel's back, basically just crossing a threshold where it's like, it's so long now, there's so much range that it actually might be a bigger buff than I previously thought. Especially because now it actually is on par with, like, Crixie, for instance, for ridiculous range, or, like, you know, outranges easily like a Vera, or outranges easily like, you know, some of the other shorter range abilities. So she might move up higher than I thought previously. Alright, next we get to our bunch of marksmen. Caphany just tumbles all the way down from 2 to 55. Basically, she can't really just walk circles around people anymore, because they either burst her down or they just stun her. And the ability to just kind of stand and fight isn't as useful anymore. You need to be either mobile yourself, and like more mobility than she has, or, you know, burst them down immediately, or, you know, stun them. So she doesn't have really any of that. And also, like, the cooldown on her ult hurt her a lot more than I initially realized. But I think maybe the biggest thing about Caphany is people have learned how to play around her, and capitalize on her weak early game. And realize that there are realize like the limits to her, you know, like people kind of underestimated the damage she had in certain situations, and overestimated in others. And so now, for instance, you can just kind of walk up to her as Tel and just kill her, whereas before that was like not a thing, because people didn't realize like the extent to her abilities. Now they do. Slims has moved up. I've moved up Slims with Valheim. Slims, because of the fact that, you know, marksman junglers are reasonable now, just by virtue of that, he's moved up. I can't lie, I've been slightly influenced by watching Zane just land ridiculous spear after ridiculous spear. But even Zane, he struggles sometimes on Slims because Slims has such a poor early game clear speed. It takes him a while to get going, and so sometimes you fall into situations where not only are you not snowballing the game in your favor, but sometimes you get snowballed the other way. But if you can get going, he is, you know, pretty ridiculous. He can be pretty ridiculous with his damage. Alright, Valheim is next. Valheim is weird because he's more useful now. I don't think he's gonna reach the height that he did, like, you know, like a year ago ish. But he's reasonable in the sideline. Like, he's reasonable in a double marksman composition, right? If when you have a marksman jungler, you can just stick Valheim in the sideline, he won't lose his sideline. He's also good for situations where you're waiting to either you're snowballing the game completely by picking all early game heroes, or you're bridging the game to the late game. Like if you want Darcy to get farmed up, you pick Valheim, or if you want to get, you know, Moraine or something, or like Quillen. If you want to get to that late game, and you need a bridge there where so that you have a really good early game, then Valheim might be your pick. Morin's the exact opposite. Morin, he has ridiculous late game, perhaps the best late game in the game, as far as like damage and being able to like have sustain is concerned. But he's just so bad in the early game that it's really painful. Like you really can't even. You're basically playing 4.5 against 5 when you pick Morin because he's just so little damage. Wisp, she kind of has the same thing going for her as before. She has like reasonable wave clear like defensively with her ult. She has decent damage. The problem is her mobility and the fact that her damage is tied to her mobility. She's still reasonable, so I haven't really moved her. Joker, I moved down quite a bit. A lot of teams need a traditional marksman in their comp, and Joker just doesn't cut it. And if you're not picking a marksman, if you decide to not pick a marksman, then you're not going to pick Joker either. So it's kind of like, where does Joker fit in? He's I was thinking of even dropping him to tier 3, but you know, he has so much damage, and there's the things he can do are so good. Like he can absolutely 1v1 an assassin who jumps on him, as long as they're, you know, physical damage dealers. So I couldn't drop him too far, but he just, there's no situation to pick him these days, right? He doesn't really auto attack all that well. If you try to burst someone, he can't burst more than one person at the same time, like a Crickneck, for instance. And if you jump in, it's difficult to get out once you've jumped in. A lot of times, like if you're trying to run away, you can die because of the fact that you can't pop your ult and then your 2 anymore. It has to be your 2 first because you can die just jumping in. So that's problematic. All right, moving on. Wukong, I dropped him a little bit. He's still roughly in the same place. The problem is there's just so many more junglers that you want to pick these days, especially with the rise of marksman junglers once more. Errol, I might get some like blowback on Errol. He obviously got a lot better with the new patch. His kit just seems just awkward still, right? Like people can outkite him. If he pops his ult, even against other marksmen, like they can still just sit there and fight and kill him. Like everyone is self-sustaining, or everyone's basically self-sustaining these days, and they can kind of deal with him, even with the fact that he got that, you know, less damage nerf on his defense. If that makes that sentence probably did not make sense. I don't even know anymore. But just let me know what you think about Errol. All right, moving on. Alice actually is reasonable. I did drop her just along with the, you know, general supports drop, but she is one of the few heroes who can use Devil's Awakening. I mean, one of the few supports, who can use Devil's Awakening because of the fact that her first ability is a pretty long cooldown. You can speed up, drop Sunshine, drop Hissy Fit, and then drop your Friendship and Sunshine again. It's pretty good. I would say she's a lot better in pros. That's the only thing. It's like when you're playing in a solo queue match, you can't do anything with her. You can't carry the game at all with her. I mean, you can do a lot obviously as a support, but sometimes you need to be able to kill the opponent, or do things yourself, and you just obviously can't do that at all with Alice. You can't clear waves. You can't take jungle camps. You can't kill people. So that's why. But if you have duo Q, trio Q, she can be really good. I would recommend her as one of the higher supports. Lumber is reasonable. Still, again, Lumber, Thane, Chris. Thane actually rose in the context of like the supports dropping. And he's still reasonable. Still has a high win rate in AOG, but yeah, they just dropped because all the supports are not that good these days. Moving on, tier 3. Malok. Malok actually might be extremely good after the new patch comes out, because being able to have your blade enchanted after shocking in is really good, as it turns out. So he might move up quite a bit, but this is the first time I've dropped him out of a tier S in a long time. And it's just because he can't deal with the side lineage these days. They just dance circles around him, even with his massive range. Same thing would happen with One Woman. Actually, tier 3 used to be like 8 heroes. The fact there's 6 in here means that I just dropped a bunch of them down. And so you might be wondering why some of these heroes are here, but it's like, I had to drop someone, right? And these are the ones who do the short stick. It's basically how it works. Wonder Woman's like okay, but she's not great. just doesn't really compete with the other heroes up top. Same thing with Emily, same thing with Astrid. Emily just not enough. Emily needs either more damage or more survivability, but she's kind of like in between spot. Same thing goes to Astrid. Not tanking, either not tanking enough or not damaging enough. And I know there's a lot of Astrid mains out there, but sorry. Arduin actually could have dropped even further. Arduin's having a really hard time as of late. He just doesn't have the tankiness. Like you think he's tanky just looking at his kit, but he just doesn't. He just doesn't. He just dies. Like bloodlust pops and he just dies two seconds later. Anyway, Yorn. If you notice, I usually bunch people up in the roll. Yorn, I was like, can I move him up towards here? Nah. Yorn, unfortunately, you're all by yourself. Obviously, he still does a lot of damage. Obviously, Sacred Protection helps him. But just doesn't compare with the other marksmen. That's just what it comes down to. Batman, you can snowball a game. Very nice early game. Lots of damage. Can sneak up on people and kill them. Obviously, it doesn't work with like Altsu or Lindis. But you can do that. The issue with Batman is just zero dash. And being able to split push as a jungler is actually surprisingly useful. Like, just pick any other jungler. Like, pick Xannis. Literally next to him. If someone catches Xannis, split pushing, and 3 people rotate over to kill him, he can run away, right? Whereas Batman needs to like preemptively use his ult to get away, and then if you're using your ult to get away, sometimes you're not gonna have it for the next fight. To hope that you're still invisible while something goes off, and then everything's just really awkward for Batman. And obviously you can't like ult if they've already like copped you, whereas someone else, for instance, like if Nekroth gets caught, he can get away. If Crickneck gets caught, he can fly away. Most heroes are able to get away, whereas Batman cannot, and that's a huge deal because he's just very, very useless in the late game. Xannis, I thought Xannis might. I actually kind of bumped Xannis up a tiny bit because I figured Devil's Awakening might be good for him, but it's just not good enough. The fact that he has such a slow clear time in the early game, it really hurts him, and the ult just didn't. Or sorry, the Devil's Awakening just didn't help him enough. But yeah, unfortunate. Butterfly bumped Butterfly up a tiny bit as well. Devil's Awakening helps her pretty well. I mean, obviously, she gets resets, but being able to use your first ability to catch up to someone and then use your ult and then have the ability available again, and then also have the resistance that Devil's Awakening provides you, which most people don't realize it does, is kind of useful. So she's okay. People might be confused by this. This is again just the same drop. Yevoneth, Aram, Mina have issues with people jumping around here, having like the massive burst assassins they have trouble with, and also the marksman junglers they have trouble with as well. So not a good time for them. Obviously there are situations where they can shine. So if you aren't facing those kinds of heroes, then go ahead and pick them because they can really do wonders for you. Pure's actually had a really good win rate in a lot of the leagues, but that's only because she's a very low pick rate, and because people pick her for certain situations. She can really snowball a game early because of the healing. You need to be in a situation where people aren't going to get completely bursted down, and you don't have to stun someone on at a moment's notice. Otherwise, she can be very nice for the sustain. Grak. Oh, my parentheses is backwards. Nice. So Grak. Obviously, same story as always. If you're hitting your hook, he's a god. If you're not, it's not very good. And in particular, you really can't help your team if you're not hitting your hooks. So that's a big deal. And moving on, Gilder. People will be sad by this, but it's the same story. I know that Pro E used him. He's like Pro E. I mean, last I checked, through the first 7 weeks, I know they've played like a few more rounds since I last checked, but in the first 7 weeks, or first 7 rounds, excuse me, of the AOG, Pro E used Gilder in the support role, playing him mostly damage, and he went 3-0 with him. So yeah, I know Gilder has potential, but again, this is where I get to the point where I'm saying, what, like, if you're comparing him to the people around him, right? Like I even have like Yevoneth, Aram, like people who used to be in the top of the list all the way down here. So if you're comparing Gilder to the people, it's like, who is he actually ahead of? Honestly, if you're picking an off the wall sideliner, I'd rather have like Emily or something like that, because he takes so long to get his damage going, and as a support, unless you're Pro E, I don't really trust you. I'm sorry, I don't trust you to be able to just like land every single 2 from long distance. Same thing goes with Trognar. I don't trust you. I'm sorry. I don't know who you are, but I don't trust you because Trognar has a very specific playstyle. I know he's been somewhat useful in some of the games that you've seen in professional matches, but it's only because he plays directly opposite to how people play him on ladder. On ladder, I see people just like jumping the back line with Trognar, which is not what you want to do. It's like, oh, I can use my 2 a billion times after I pop my ult. It's like, no, just forget you have a 2. Just forget you have a second ability. Just stay back. The thing that's most annoying about Trognar is the fact that he's just this annoying wall in front of your team, between your team and the enemy, and they can't get through it. And any damage they do use inconsequential. So, but like that with Trognar, maybe we'll move him up. But for now, no. Also, the Purifying Bracers are getting a buff, so that will hurt Trognar as well. If you disagree, let me know in the comments, obviously. Last, we have the Ultimate Specialist. I've dropped a few heroes that used to be higher down to here. Chi just seems very just blah. Doesn't really do a whole lot for you. Obviously, she's getting a nice buff where she knocks people back a lot farther than they used to, so she might move up quite a bit because that's a game changer. But we'll see. Arthur is like one of the first candidates to move down. Because of the fact that I've moved generally the entire list down. Jack of all trades, master of none, basically. He can still be useful. You know, I always look back at that time when I think it was Yikes. He picked Arthur as like a pseudo counter to Superman because they couldn't get Omen, and it worked out pretty well. So you know, if you're in situations like that, that might be a way to have good use of Arthur. But he just doesn't have, he doesn't have the extreme mobility or the extreme burst damage or any of that kind of stuff to be able to compete with the top heroes. Vera, I actually moved Vera up, strangely enough, or in the context of this tier list, because I mean I moved her down to tier 4, but I moved her ahead of. Actually, no, I already had her ahead of Maganga. My bad. Vera actually does well with Devil's Awakening. The problem is that in the early game, that doesn't really allow her to get kills still. Like, she's still one of those heroes who likes to duel, but dueling heroes like to have a good early game so that they can snowball the game, right? If you're going to take a while to get to a point where you can duel, then it's really problematic, right? Because by the time you're ready to duel, no one's trying to duel you. Maganga, speaking of people who like to duel in the early game, Maganga, he's really good early game, absolutely terrible all the rest of the game, unless he's just completely farmed because you gave him kills. If you're watching this and you're a player who's in, like, I don't know, platinum or lower, and you're like, oh my god, but I always lose to Maganga, it's just don't fight him. Don't fight him until you get your ult. Just don't fight him early game. He's really good early game. That's the only time you're ever going to lose him. Don't think you're going to beat him. Don't think like, oh, I'm playing, I don't know, Liliana. Liliana is so good. D2 has him so high, and Maganga's so trash. Like, I should be able to beat Maganga. It's like, no, that's not how it works. Just wait till you're level 4 and then deal with him. Up until then, he's just gonna beat you. So don't even deal with him. Anyone tries to argue Maganga's good because they lost him in the early game, they don't know what they're talking about. All right, Toro. Toro is still fine. He's still good, and they still misses him. They want that beef. They can't have it. He's fine. He just doesn't have the mobility to deal with the other, or he doesn't have the basically utility to help his team out. The fact that his cast animation is extremely long and his 2 doesn't really do a whole lot is problematic. Weirdo, same thing. I did see that one Circle video where he was like completely dominating the sideline, but that's Circle playing against someone who's worse than him, so I don't really trust that. And yeah, I guess Weiro's probably better in the sideline than he is in the so as a support. But in a way, that's actually even more damning, because if he's better as a sideliner, then he has way more competition to deal with, right? There's like so many just terrifying sideliners, so that's not actually a good thing. Lastly, we have Ozanga. I had him last in a couple lists ago. He's moved back to last. He's just extremely slow, extremely clunky. Obviously, being able to use your ult, or like he's actually reasonable with like a Devil's Awakening, but then if you have Devil's Awakening, you don't have Sacred Protection. It's just really problematic. Like, it would be nice if you had both, but unfortunately, he can't be so lucky. All right, thank you for watching. I'll try to get these published at the exact same time. This is a weight off my chest. I know this might not be the best tier list, but I tried, guys. I did my best for you. Let me know where you disagree. Let me know where you agree. Actually, give me some positive feedback as well, because I was killing myself trying to get this out. Yeah, so there's actually been quite a big lull between I think content stuff on d2av.com, but now that I've gotten this out, I'll hopefully get some more stuff out as well. I had a nice guest contributor write a massive guide on how to play the 10v10 mayhem mode, so you all want to check that out in the days to come. Thank you guys for watching, and hopefully you've enjoyed this tier list, which cost me basically my life. See you guys later. Thanks. And oh yeah, click subscribe, click the bell, and go to my website. Bye bye.